Think about the last argument you had. Really think about it. Did either of you actually change your mind? Did the truth win? Or did it just end in silence, in exhaustion, in two people retreating to the same positions they arrived with? There's a reason for that. And it has nothing to do with who was right. There was a time when you argued. Not because you were aggressive. Not because you needed to win. But because you genuinely believed that if you explained it clearly enough, if you found exactly the right words, the right logic, the right angle of entry, the other person would finally understand. And you would feel, at the end of it, something like relief. Like the truth had been received. Like the distance between what you saw and what they saw had finally closed. That time probably ended quietly. Not in a single moment. But gradually, in the accumulation of conversations that went nowhere. In the exhaustion of being right and it not matching. In the strange loneliness of realizing that the other person was not actually listening, that they had never been listening, and that no version of what you said was ever going to change that. And something shifted in you after that. Something that is difficult to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. A kind of stillness that arrived not from giving up, but from finally understanding something true about people. About what they actually are. About why they behave the way they behave, defend what they defend, believe what they believe, not because of logic, not because of evidence, but because of something far older and far less rational than either. This is what understanding human nature actually does to you. It doesn't make you cynical. It doesn't make you cold. It makes you quiet in a way that people who haven't arrived there yet will sometimes mistake for indifference. But it isn't indifference. It is something closer to clarity. And clarity, once it settles in you, changes everything about the way you move through the world. Here is what most people never learn about arguments. The argument was never about the topic. It was never about the fact being disputed, the opinion being challenged, the position being defended. Those were just the surface. Underneath every argument, underneath every raised voice, every passive-aggressive message, every conversation that spiraled into something neither person intended, there is something far more personal happening. Someone's sense of self is being threatened. And a threatened self does not reason. It defends. And when people are defending, they are not listening. They are waiting. Waiting for the gap where they can re-enter with the counter. Waiting to feel safe again. And nothing you say, however accurate, however thoughtful, however carefully constructed, will reach a person in that state, because the part of them that would receive it is not the part currently in control. This is not a flaw in people. It is the design. The human brain developed its threat response system long before it developed its reasoning one. And that system cannot always distinguish between a predator and a perspective that challenges its worldview. To the nervous system, both register as danger. Both produce the same physiological response, the narrowing of perception, the closing of openness, the hardening of position. Which means that the moment a conversation tips into territory that feels threatening to someone's identity, their brain is no longer in the business of evaluating ideas. It is in the business of surviving the moment. And you cannot reason with a survival response. You can only wait for it to pass. And by the time it passes, the conversation has usually already become something else entirely. Once you truly understand this, not intellectually, but in the way that knowledge eventually becomes feeling, you stop approaching disagreement the way you used to. Not because you no longer have convictions, but because you understand that conviction, by itself, is not a transmission mechanism. You can hold something true with absolute certainty and still be entirely unable to transfer that certainty to another person, because transfer requires something the other person has to choose. Openness. And openness cannot be argued into existence. The people who understand this become quieter in rooms where noise is expected. They stop performing their intelligence in conversations where no one is actually thinking. They stop volunteering their real perspectives to people who have already decided, stop correcting things that don't need to be corrected by them, stop entering battles where the only possible outcome is exhaustion. Not because they have stopped caring, but because they have developed a more sophisticated understanding of where their energy actually belongs. This is where most people misread them. The quiet is interpreted as agreement. The stillness is interpreted as passivity. The decision not to engage is interpreted as having nothing to say. But inside that quiet, there is usually an enormous amount happening: observation, assessment, the quiet cataloging of exactly what is going on beneath the surface of the interaction. Because when you stop arguing, you start seeing. And what you start seeing is something that was always there but was invisible while you were busy trying to be heard. You see the performance. Not performance in the cynical sense, not manipulation, not theater. But the entirely human, entirely unconscious act of being a version of yourself shaped by the room you are in. People adjust constantly. The voice shifts. The opinions soften or harden depending on the audience. The confidence varies based on who is watching. And none of this is dishonesty. It is the natural behavior of a social animal that learned, early in its development, that belonging to the group was a survival requirement. The ego is not a villain. It is an adaptation. But once you see it clearly in others and eventually in yourself, it becomes very difficult to take most arguments seriously. Because most arguments are not exchanges of ideas. They are negotiations of social position. They are two egos attempting to establish dominance in the only arena available, the conversation. And once you see that, the urgency drains out of the whole enterprise. What replaces it is something quieter and considerably more useful. The ability to be present in a conversation without being threatened by it. To hear a perspective you disagree with and feel curious rather than defensive. To let someone be wrong without needing to announce it. To hold your own understanding loosely enough that new information can actually reach you, which is the only way understanding ever deepens. This is not detachment in the cold sense. It is detachment in the precise sense. The ability to be in the experience without being consumed by it. To observe the pattern without becoming the pattern. Most people live inside their reactions. The reaction arrives and they are already inside it, already speaking from it, already building a case from it before they have had a single moment of actual reflection. And this is not because they are unintelligent. It is because no one ever showed them the space that exists between the stimulus and the response. The thin, quiet gap where a choice actually lives. Where you can feel the pull toward defensiveness and simply notice it rather than obey it. Where you can recognize the performance in the room without joining it. That gap is small at first. But it widens with practice. And the wider it gets, the calmer everything becomes. The people who have found this place stop over-explaining themselves. Not because they don't value being understood, but because they have stopped making their peace contingent on it. They say what is true for them, once, clearly, without inflation or apology. And then they let it land wherever it lands. Because they have learned that the need to over-explain is itself a form of anxiety, a belief that unless the other person fully receives and validates what you've said, something important is lost. But nothing is lost. Your understanding of yourself does not require the other person's agreement. Your clarity does not need their confirmation. And once that settles, the exhausting work of managing how people receive you simply falls away. What remains is something most people spend their entire lives searching for: in noise. A kind of internal quiet. Not the absence of thought, not the end of feeling, but the steady, unshakable sense of being anchored in yourself regardless of what the room is doing. Regardless of who is arguing, who is performing, who is seeking validation, who is defending a position they can't even fully articulate. You can be in all of that and remain entirely yourself. Unmoved not because you don't feel it, but because you have stopped confusing feeling it with needing to respond to it. This is what understanding human nature actually gives you. Not superiority. Not distance. Not the cold satisfaction of seeing through people. Something far simpler and far more valuable. Permission. Permission to stop fighting battles that were never yours to win. Permission to let people be exactly who they are without needing them to be different. Permission to be quiet when quiet is wiser than any word you could say. And the strange thing, the thing you only discover after you have been in this place for a while, is that silence, real silence, the kind that comes from understanding rather than withdrawal, is not empty. It is the fullest thing you have ever felt. What you just heard is one piece. But there's a deeper layer underneath it. Why emotionally aware people eventually stop explaining themselves entirely, not just in arguments, but in relationships, in rooms, in versions of themselves they used to perform. That one is coming. Stay close.